Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon, Brian.
The news today is, I suppose, mostly more of the same thing, but it seems that one sort of thing has been increasing in incidents in the last few weeks, and that is the shootings and murderings. But the one that attracted my attention more than anything else was not actually a new event, but one for which the perpetrators had just been sentenced in England, and they are the parents of a 17-year-old girl whom they had suffocated their daughter because they thought they had evidence. I think it was just addresses on her iPhone or cell phone that she had been showing that she'd been interacting with boys of her own. And they had been, this is something that they had talked to her about a lot. There had been a lot of trouble with her in the family about that. She had other sisters being treated in the same way. They wanted to take her to Pakistan in order to marry her so that she would be safely out of this situation. She didn't want to do that. And they finished up by suffocating her and dismembering her. But the body was eventually found. For a while, nothing was done because there was no body, and so even though she disappeared, nobody knew where she was. But then the body was found, and the main evidence for the fact that what they had done was that the sisters, because they'd done it in front of the girl's sisters in order to be an example for them, actually told the court that they had seen her. Now, this, of course, just happens to be in the English news at the moment, and an occasion for a great deal of discussion in the Guardian's comments. But it's not new. It's the sort of thing that has been happening a lot in England. It's also been happening in Germany. I think there have been cases in France, but I can't remember a particular one. And we know, of course, that it happens a lot in Pakistan. There was an extraordinary case in Pakistan this past week when a man and a woman were apparently caught in flagrante delictu and by the police. I can't imagine how that happened. But they were stripped naked and forced to walk through the town to the police station naked in order to be charged. And there in Pakistan, the police have been thrown in jail for doing it, which shows that there is at least a difference of opinion about this sort of thing in Pakistan. Anyway, I think that this is something that we can relate to the process of globalization, and that it's important to do this because I think most people won't think of it in those terms.
Well, there's two aspects to it. There's the obvious aspect of people transporting their cultures and traditional laws or reactions, if you will, into their new home societies. And then there's the other aspect to it as well, is that presumably these people are quote-unquote rational or sane, or at least have some practical intuition as to life in general. So somewhere along the line, a discussion occurred at the dinner table between the mother and the father after the daughters had gone to bed, and there was a recognition that the law of Britain would be broken. Ramifications could perhaps ensue, but they decided to go ahead with it anyway because they were bound to a higher law. Not to sound like the Hebrew National Kosher ads, but I mean that's unreal to me, that kind of a decision can be made. And yeah, it leads to a whole speculation that feeds an awful lot of this right-wing frenzy about Muslims in America eventually wanting Sharia courts, the same in the West and Western Europe. And I really wonder as to the strength of that homeland kind of tradition / culture / allegiance that follows. Does it, or will it ever erode? What will the next generation be like? Will that same kind of conversation be able to occur in that family's kitchen table late at night? Would it end up the same way? Presumably not.
Well, what you say makes me think of another incident from some time back in the past that occurred to me. Esther Bosserup was a well-known Danish economist who wrote a very successful book in the 1960s, whom we invited on agricultural development, actually. But she also wrote about the changing status of women in relation to developing economies in the 1980s. She died some time ago now, but we invited her here to a conference in the early 1970s, and she was already then very obviously a grandmother. And I remember her talking very eloquently in front of our select international conference about grandmothers killing their grandchildren and mothers killing their children in tribal situations where it made sense to do so from, that is, in situations where the people had no technology, lived in very small societies, were not integrated into any larger civilization, because it made sense for them to do so. And it reminds me of the fact that we have ideas about the family that we assume are natural, which in fact haven't been natural throughout human history by any means. So I think we have to be careful of that, even though, of course, I agree that it's absolutely awful and something has to be done about it. I think that the way we have to deal with these situations now is to realize that the people in England who are doing this have come from Pakistan, and Pakistan is at a different stage of the progress towards a globalized future from the situation in England. And up until about 20 or 30 years ago, when Pakistanis came to England and settled, they tended to assimilate to English society because there weren't all that many of them, and they had to fit in places where they didn't have Pakistani friends to learn how to work in English society. But since the 1980s, that situation has changed because there's such an influx. And so in order to find their own way, they stay together.
They've created enclaves.
Create their own society. And then there's the problem of the relationship between their society and England in the midst of English society.
The host society.
And of course, as the generations change, that problem will also change, because the young won't have the same feelings about it as the people who actually came. However, at the moment, we're in this crucial phase of the transition between the two, where the young want to change and the old feel they daren't let it happen.
Right, right. Well, from a broader perspective, then, what does this mean? Is it fear of integrating into the host society, or is it more an allegiance to the former society, or is it just simply the way men are constructed? I mean, there's no impact whatsoever from external events like this.
I would say that they're in a situation where the only order that they can rely on in their lives is the order they've known in the past. And they feel they have to hold on to it at any cost, because what will happen to them if they lose that and they're just in the midst of English society that they don't really understand, where all sorts of terrible things are going on that, according to what they were what they grew up to believe in. And I think that we're going through a stage of change at the moment where these problems are worse than they've ever been in the past, and probably worse than they'll ever be in the future, simply because the awareness of everybody of what everybody else is doing is greater than it ever was before because of the media.
Sure.
And the difference between what some people are doing and what other people are doing in close quarters is greater than it's ever been before.
So if now I know you don't have any first-hand knowledge of this, but if you were to hypothesize about the parents of the murdered girl, would you suspect that they have had increasingly frequent interaction with other societies, or are they pretty much, do you think, traditional within the Pakistani enclave of the town they've lived in England? Probably the latter.
The puzzle with this particular case is that the husband, the father, this is his second marriage.
Oh.
And his first marriage was with a Danish woman.
Oh my God.
He lived in Denmark.
So he's already out of the fold.
That divorced her, went back to Pakistan and got a Pakistani wife.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he obviously already had some sort of nervous reaction to the problem of adapting to a more a globalizing situation, which was very much far ahead, very far ahead from what he'd known in Pakistan. But I also wonder whether this can be related to what happened in Wisconsin a few days ago.
Well, that certainly was chilling. What's coming out now is they seem to be, the authorities are beginning to release information about the shooter had a severe problem with alcoholism that then somehow evolved into a white supremacist angle, which was really quite pronounced. And I suppose that the temple filled with Sikhs could have been a mosque filled with Muslims. It could have been a temple filled with Jews. It could have been any of the above.
Well, I'm sure he didn't know the difference between Sikhs and Muslims anyway.
I'm sure he didn't.
A turban is a turban, after all.
That's true, unfortunately.
And I mean, I see white supremacists as a serious social problem in the present, but a problem that belongs to a particular phase of the past, where some people, starting in the 19th century, began to try desperately to hold on to the situation that they'd known in the past, an effort to maintain society as it was, has continued even right up to the present, although it's probably weaker now than it was 50 years ago. Well, certainly weaker now than it was 50 years ago, but it's getting weaker all the time, I think.
Well, it's very interesting because there's a very good organization in this country called the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I had never heard of this murderer. And I still, from everything I've read, would view him as an extraordinarily minor figure in the overall white supremacist movement, such as it is. But the Southern Poverty Law Center said today that they had been tracking him for the past 8 years. So he had risen to the level where he appeared on their radar screen, which led me then to think, boy, they must have one heck of a list of people that they track. So you have an organization that's out there, if you will, trying to out these people to make sure that individuals understand who's living on their block or what employers understand about when they hire them. And I mean, it's a good reaction in my mind, because it shines like a light into the darkness that these people otherwise hide in.
Well, that's particularly interesting. I hadn't heard that. But it shows how intelligence, and I don't really mean intelligence in the traditional sense, but data, is increasing to such an incredible extent. I mean, I think there's a lot of situations like this among the Muslim communities in England, where a lot is known about people who are likely to be involved in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I think special branch and MI5.
But things don't get done in time because, of course, there has to be legality. You can't just interfere in people's lives on the suspicion that they might be about to do something.
Correct, correct. Well, I'll tell you something. I mean, these kinds of I almost said the word tribally, and I guess I might even keep it, but these kind of culturally and tribally motivated crimes bring such a specter of horror into their host societies when they occur, that it really leads to a very disconcerting situation, because it's a sense of revulsion that the host society has. When in fact, yes, perhaps as a defense attorney, you might be able to put together a colorable argument defending them, maybe. But the gap, the chasm is so wide that I'm practically speechless about it.
I'm glad you picked up on that word tribal, which I had used before. It's a difficult word that tends to have connotations that don't necessarily help with the argument, but we use it to mean a society that is very small. And of course, Pakistan society isn't very small. But the interesting thing about what happened in Pakistan is that it's all justified in terms of honor.
Yes.
Not in terms of Islam. And it's not a general Islamic feature. It's not something you find everywhere in the Islamic world. It's interesting that you find it particularly in Pakistan and Afghanistan and northern India, among Hindus as well as Muslims. But you also find it a great deal among Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
And what it means is that the only security that people have in terms of the way they feel about their relationship with everybody else is the standing of their family in relation to other families, because there's no overall central authority. There's no tradition of any overall central authority.
Mm-hmm. But yet that's not it's not similar, say, in Saudi Arabia or Indonesia amongst those Muslim populations.
It may happen there,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a much more much stricter tribal framework in Saudi Arabia, which controls people's behavior much better.
Right.
And I think that they don't rely on the honor system as much as turns out to be the case in situations like this part of Pakistan and Palestinians, where for centuries until very recently there has been no central authority, and now there's a central authority which nobody has any respect for.
Right.
And so the honor system is the only thing available to them for any sort of order.
Well, it's good fodder for a defense lawyer for them. But let me throw a little bit of a curveball at you. Speaking of globalization and the increased interaction in media and information outlets, I have been watching a little bit of these Olympic Games in London, which naturally represent every country in the world. What do you think about the ramifications of this spectacle on globalization?
I think it's extremely interesting to watch. Of course, the most medals go to China, America, and surprisingly England.
Yes. You've edged the Russians out.
And the least medals to Israel.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think they're getting any medals at all.
I don't think so.
No. And there was an article in one newspaper today about the fact that they're trying to explain that they're really good sportsmen, but they're not good enough to get medals.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the game that matters, not winning, which is what we always used to say when we didn't win.
Right.
But there's also been a lot about the success of Africans.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's amazing how well Africans do from some parts of Africa, especially the east and northeast part of Africa, because presumably they don't have anything like the facilities for training that you would find in China, America, or England.
Right.
So it provides an international forum which, although of course there's a lot of politics going on at the same time, nevertheless the politics, one assumes, have nothing to do with who actually wins, and so a lot of countries get attention they wouldn't otherwise get if it wasn't for the Olympics.
Well, I'm thinking of viewers around the world, seeing athletes representing all different countries, wearing the same pair of shorts, running the same distance race, and being judged in the same manner. It has to bring a bit of a leavening effect to perceptions that there were all of these cultural distinctions and differences that existed between them.
Especially when all the women are allowed to wear the same things as the men.
Yes, yeah, I've noticed that. That's a little different than before, isn't it? All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of the time then, Brian. All right, thank you very much. All right.
Bye.
Okay.